So Peter, you have put countless hours into running the museum, establishing the archives. As you pass the torch to the next leaders of the museum, what is your wish? What is your hope for the community when it comes to these buildings and ensuring we continue to preserve them?
Well, the biggest thing on my mind is the fact that the next generations, that there be enough people who are willing to look at history, understand what that history did to make to allow them to be here.
We may have to get you to make a TikTok.
Well, whatever TikTok is. I know the name TikTok, but beyond that, I know nothing. But my wish is that it continue. There is so much more to learn about the
Right,
background of Hemlock Farms. And again, as I said before, it's such a unique area because
right,
other communities have been carved out of the woods.
right.
Maybe they've been somebody's private property, obviously at one point or another. But this has there's substance
Yeah,
to it,
yeah.
and I just want to see it continue.
Okay,
Even if I'm not here, if
right,
I'm going to move back, come back and still partake of it because this
right.
is just to me, it's the greatest community
That's awesome.
that I can think of.
I've heard the expression the Cadillac of the Poconos.
Right.
As a resident that's been here 6 years, but very familiar with the Borscht Belt of the Catskills and the Pocono resorts. This is how I grew up as family vacations.
Right.
Explain to me what the Cadillac of the Poconos meant.
Well, when it first started, obviously there were homes that were started off in the '60s, and people were uh, coming up here, buying property through whichever means of advertising they went through, and they found, well, to use the slogan, close enough,
Far enough.
far enough, the perfect place to be, or near enough, far enough, the
Right,
perfect
right,
place to
right,
be.
right.
They came out here and they began to gel. Some of them never knew each other, and they began to gel because they
Right,
started putting together groups of activities for the young kids, the baseball. They even had stuff for the adults. They had a
right,
women's volleyball team
right.
that used to play. It was just it brought about something very made a very
Community
cohesive
oriented,
community.
very
Yes,
familiar. Right.
and everybody was began to know everybody else, regardless of their background. And this is, I would believe that's probably the origin of the Cadillac of the Poconos.
Right,
Other people went to communities, but they didn't know each other, and they only came up. They came up and they went home. People came up here.
right,
They may have only come up here on temporary basis here and there,
right.
but when they got here, they got involved.
So knowing the history of Hemlock Farms, where it all began, which is pretty much right here,
Right.
why is it important that our community understand the history, know the history, and when you look at these buildings, why is it so important to preserve this?
Exactly. Okay. Well, you can go back. First of all, I believe personally, and I think a lot of people do too, the background of Hemlock Farms is so much different. It's very unique as compared to other gated communities up in Pennsylvania. And I have no disrespect to
Right,
them,
right,
but this has a written history, one that can be traced back even actually to the beginning of the 19th century.
okay,
Um, the buildings that were built here by the Brewster family during the 30s and 40s, um, when the property was sold in the early 1960s to the Canadian outfit, they were home developers, but they were interested in maintaining the specific environment.
okay,
So they wanted to keep these buildings,
okay,
and they're well built. When you look at something like the horse barn,
right.
I mean, this is going to outlast many of us who are alive here today.
Well, we hope.
You
I
hope.
think that's part of the bigger conversation of preserving. So when we look at the argument of build new, preserve old, there's a middle ground,
Right,
right? It's not one or the other.
right.
But in your opinion, in being so involved in the museum and bringing this history and education to Hemlock Farms, you know, share with me why you feel personally it's important to preserve these buildings and to keep this part of Hemlock's legacy to for the public.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm deeply involved with history. I've been all my whole life. So just looking at old buildings, you look at them and they look beautiful. Obviously, they need to be maintained, and these
Right,
buildings are not new. They were built in the 30s and 40s, and they do need some work. But just the beauty of them, when you look at the
right.
horse barn and you look at the cupola up on top there, you just don't find these types of buildings anymore. And my own feeling is in this country, we kind of bulldoze everything down and start from new. And in
I agree with you.
some cases it's necessary.
Right, but in New York City, you're not going to bulldoze the Empire State Building. It's
Right.
part of a rich legacy. It's an
Exactly.
example of Art Deco. These buildings are our legacy, our history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They connect well the Brewster years and the Hemlock years, which are very, very tightly woven together. They're
Right,
not it's not two separate eras.
right.
It's two separate eras time wise, but history wise it's something that it's so unique that we have to maintain them,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so people know that there was something here beforehand.
it's great. So in the 1960s, when the development really started,
Right.
this community has incredible examples of mid-century architecture.
Correct.
And there were 10 or so model homes
Right.
that were being advertised. You could purchase them fully furnished. And a lot of that really does emulate the Cadillac of the Poconos because
Correct.
architecturally it was beautiful. Then the amenities were also there. So when we think about the future also and preserving or educating to the legacy not only of the Brewster buildings, but these incredible examples of Americana.
Right.
Share with me your thoughts on that as part of our legacy of Hemlock Farms and how that does differ from other recreation communities in the Poconos.
Well, it differs again because the people. I think most of the people who are here, they like the looks of the community and they want to maintain it.
Right.
There is always the tendency to move ahead, which we have to do.
Right.
Progress is progress, but to do it in a planned basis where we don't throw away the history.
Right.
That's the one thing.
Right.
We don't have to have everything being historic. There are some historic items that just go by the wayside. They
Right.
can't help
They
that.
may not have the significance of what we're looking at right now.
Exactly. These will never be again.
Right.
And once they're gone, no matter what is built in its place, it's not going to be a reminder
Right.
of how Hemlock Farms became Hemlock Farms.
Right. You could take the archives and the contributions to the museum that people can look at and put them, let's say, in another building, but it loses the significance
Exactly.
because this area is the true legacy of Hemlock Farms.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question about it. And I agree with that wholeheartedly.
My last question or thoughts that I'd like to hear from you is about community pride. And how, in your opinion, does history, does education of how the Hemlock Farms community was built, the significance of these buildings, how important do you think that is when it comes to community pride?
I think it's very important. When we first started as an ad hoc committee of the board back when we were going to, prior to celebrating the community's 50th birthday, we created this committee. We had 5 or 6 people who were involved,
Okay.
and we were looking for community members to donate items, whether they were photos, artifacts of one sort or another, memories, you name it. And
Storytellers.
the storytellers, and it was amazing what came through to these
Yeah.
people, especially those who had been here for a long time, and they developed themselves, they developed their community pride through all their volunteer work. And when you think about everything that we have, as expensive as it might be in some way, shapes, and forms,
Right.
initially these people they did it all themselves voluntarily, and it's just we want to try and continue that
Right.
because there's still a lot of pride in the community. When you go around, you talk to people, when they say, "I love it here," you know, Yeah, everybody's got a little bit of a complaint here and there. We all do.
Right.
We're not human if we don't have a
Right.
complaint. But we just want to push that pride, and we feel that the history is what is a driving force to that, to keep that pride going.
Great.
We have something, let's keep
Let's
it.
keep it going. Can you share with me the history of the Brewster Stables?
Okay, Brewster's probably in the early or late 30s, early 40s. I'm not sure the exact year that this building was constructed. Um, they had horses.
Okay.
And they had several, which they used to keep in the wintertime. They would keep it down in I don't remember if it was North or South Carolina.
Okay.
They would bring them up in the springtime. They would enter them in various horse shows in this general region, and many of them were prize winners. Um, Once the Brewsters sold, this building became stables for residents. If they had horses, they could
So the community used to have horseback
they
riding
did
here.
up until the late 70s. There are people here
Interesting.
who still remember as kids
Going
riding
horseback riding
through.
on the trails.
We had loads of trails, which obviously now are pretty well cut up, because
Right.
in the 70s there may have been at most maybe 2,000 homes.
Right.
And now that there's 3,200, a lot of the trails have been cut off.
Okay.
And it just became a very expensive proposition, as many people were
Right.
not horse people.
Right.
But the horse barn itself right now is used for storage, but it's got such potential to be some sort of a community center where
Interesting.
receptions and all that can be.
Well, what a great place to throw events or
Oh,
weddings
yes.
or any types of parties. The structural significance, original weather vane?
I believe it is. I believe it is. And that's been there from day one. And when you drive by, you can't miss it.
It's a magnificent building.
Oh, without question. And that cupola does the job. I think it just makes it that much nicer.
It's called a cupola.
Yes.
Interesting.
The bottom part. I don't know if that's specifically a cupola. I know a barn that was on the property where I grew up. It was a large glass encased type of thing. But I believe that's all the stonework here was originally done by Brewster.
Mm-hmm. And the red, brown, and green, that comes up a lot in conversations about why do we have to keep things red, brown, and green? But those are the colors. That's
those
the
were
brand
the
of Hemlock.
colors. Those were the colors. And people have asked, why did Brewster choose these, or any members of his family? And we don't really know. I mean, there's guesswork. Some people say, well, it was probably paint that was left over from some of his large highway project. We don't know that. It's just what they
But it's
chose.
important.
Yes, it is. It is.
Absolutely.
And some people like brighter colors, but this is the way it's been.
But this is the integrity of those buildings.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly. I don't know if that was a yellow-looking building. I don't think it would make it.
I don't think so either.
It wouldn't make it as good looking.
One other building with historic importance is our steer barn. And from what I understand, it's exactly what it was. It used to home steer.
That was it. He had a herd of steer, which were raised specifically to provide fresh beef for his family and his guests. He had a lot of important people that used to come up here. There are some legends about some of these important people, which we have not been able to prove one way or another yet. He also had the herd of cows down the hill from the administration building. That's all lined with white tile. And his daughter indicated years ago that he lined that with tile because he felt that the cows should be as comfortable as his guests. The contented cows. What was it? Carnation milk. Used to
right.
And so he had the cow barn, he had the steer barn, which if you look at it closely and look at an old picture of the steer barn, you can still see the outline. Obviously, it's been added to and altered, but the steer barn name is very appropriate because that's where they were.
And the cow barn is where the administration buildings are?
You go down the lane past the administration. There's the administration building, and over here is the youth center, which was part of the dairy, because he had a dairy also. You go down that lane, and the first building on your left is the cow barn.
Okay.
It's used primarily as storage right now.
Is there any significance of where these buildings were all located and further down the way where he built them, or is it just geographically how he wanted it?
I guess it's geographically how he wanted it. He had these thousands of acres. He could do pretty much whatever he
He
wanted.
could spread out.
And I'm assuming, based upon his construction background, that
There was a plan.
he had plans.
Right. Awesome. This building here, known today as our conference center,
Correct.
what was the original?
That was the home of the younger brother of William Brewster, who was the original caretaker of the estate. The estate itself was about almost 4,000 acres at that particular point.
And their home was the country club.
The William Brewster's home
William Bruce's home.
was the country. It was actually the second home. That's another story. It was a tiny cabin that was on
Okay.
Little Camp Pond.
Okay. So this was the home of
George, I believe it's George M. Brewster Jr.
Okay.
And he was the caretaker. He passed away some years after the development of the estate,
Okay.
and the assistant caretaker at that point took over and was that way for several years. He was the caretaker who lived in the orchard house.
Interesting. Great.
So anyway, I might mention too that one of our speakers several years back was the daughter of the assistant caretaker. She grew up in that house.
Really?
Very interesting speaker, because she talked about the Brewsters and the gardens that they had here, the vegetable gardens,
Right.
the flower gardens. It was
Awesome.
we have it all taped. So.
Great. Good. Okay. So our last building, which I know is near and dear to your heart, because it's where our museum and our archives are located, that's referred to as the Orchard House.
Correct.
Can you share the history of that building?
That building was put up somewhere in the probably early 40s, maybe the late 30s, and it was the home of the assistant caretaker. Upon the passing of George M. Brewster Jr., okay, the caretaker took over as the caretaker, and he was there until I believe it's 1961 when he passed.
Interesting.
But the building itself, this was actually the front entrance to it. You can see it this way. And on to the left is where we have the museum and archives. Once we started to expand, we were just in a little tiny spot in the administrative annex 12 years ago. We were able to use the room that has the fireplace in it, and the addition to the left, which once was a porch, that's also part of the archives. And at one point, it used to be the home of succeeding managers for the community of Hemlock Farms.
That's interesting.
Right. But as you can see, it's an older house, and it doesn't conform to modern needs.
So the Orchard House, and across the street over there is some of the apple orchard trees that are left.
That was George William Brewster's Victory Orchard.
Okay.
During World War II, there were the Victory Gardens, which everybody who's of that ilk remembers. They had something in their backyard. It was a Victory Garden. His was a Victory Orchard, and many of those are still the original trees.
So those are still the original trees.
Yeah.
Orchard House. And then when we look around, where were the gardens?
The gardens, the vegetable garden was directly on this field in front of the horse barn.
Okay.
And all around this area too, across Orchard Drive from the Orchard House is where Brewster had sheep. He had a sheep barn.
Interesting.
And he raised sheep there, and they went through the whole. He had a lot of employees. My guess is he had close to 100 employees, not maybe at one time.
Right.
But all these people did all the work for him.
Interesting.
They planted his gardens, they maintained them, and it was nice to be rich.
Yeah.